Let's get it underway. Welcome to the Governance Forum for residents here at Horizon House. My name is Neil McReynolds, a member of the Governance Committee of the Board of Trustees and a 9-year resident here. Tonight's Governance Forum is a rescheduled one we had planned for June the 2nd. Sorry about having to make that change. Well, this forum is focused on how decisions are made at the Horizon House, who makes them, and how residents can provide input. We have a unique system of governance here compared to other retirement communities across the country, a system that has served us well for the last 6 decades. So you're going to hear about that tonight. Horizon House is governed by 2 separate bodies, a Board of Trustees and a Residents' Council. This evening we'll learn about how these bodies are selected, their respective missions, and how they work together in governing the whole operation. The speakers this evening, Bill Andersen and Ned Lange, have had leadership roles in both groups as well as having governance experience outside of Horizon House. Both are lawyers. Bill is a retired faculty member at the University of Washington School of Law. Here at Horizon House, he served as president of the Residents' Council and has served on a number of committees for the Board of Trustees, including the Finance Committee. He's been a resident here for 17 years. Ned Lange practiced law in downtown Seattle, and here at Horizon House, he served on the Board of Trustees and is chair of the Governance Committee, and currently serves as vice president of the Residents' Council. He's been a resident here for 17 years as well. After the presentation of Bill and Ned, we will entertain your questions from the audience, so think up some good ones for them. With that,
I'm ready to go. I don't need that.
okay, you don't need
I got this. That's yours. Thank you, Neil. At the request of the board's governance committee, we first presented a forum on governance in 2012. We repeated it in 2014, 17, 19, 22, and March of 24. So here we go again for the 7th time. We're glad you're here, and we hope it will refresh your recollection, or it will inform new residents and update you with any changes. What do we mean by governance? Here is as good a definition as I think anyone could come up with. It's the rules and the practices and the processes by which the organizations at Horizon House are directed and controlled, basically the authority for decisions. But here at Horizon House, as Neil mentioned, we have 2 organizations, and we have a dual system, 2 organizations with separate governances. I'm going to cover the Horizon House Board of Trustees, and Bill is going to cover the Residents' Council. The Board of Trustees of Horizon House, well, I should say, these are 2 separate corporations. Horizon House, which owns, operates the facility for us, it provides, as it says, elderly? Provides persons with housing and services. The Residents' Council is a separate corporation, and it represents the residents and enhances our lifestyle with so many activities that Bill will cover. These are both separate, each is a separate what is called a 501c3 corporation, which means it's a charitable corporation. So you can make tax-deductible gifts to it.
No commercials, come on.
No commercials, no. But your gifts to the Partners in Caring or to the Council for the Employees Annual Recognition Fund are deductible under the federal income tax. And I'm going to talk about Horizon House, and Bill's going to talk about the Residents' Council. The Board of Trustees of Horizon House. The bylaws provide a board of from 10 to 15 members. the board establishes how many the membership shall be at any particular time. Currently, there are 10 members of the board. The resident council president is a member of the board ex officio, full board member. Ex officio merely means by virtue of her office. She also sits on the Board of Trustees of Horizon House. She has full participation as a board member. In addition, the United Church of Christ has a designee. The rest of the board is elected by the Board of Trustees, and we'll go through a little bit about their process of selection. A little bit of history on that. Prior to 2018, all of the board except the resident council president was elected by the ministry of the UCC Church, the conference ministry. And the UCC conference minister was an ex officio member of the board without a vote. At the request of the church, we changed that. They said, since the board nominates and knows these people, and we don't, and our election has merely become a formality and a ritual, of which doesn't make a heck of a lot of sense because of the knowledge and so forth, they said, let's change it. And in addition, the minister of the was removed as an ex officio non-voting member of the board. I think he got kind of bored, maybe, and that's why that was done. But that was the history, and it was changed at their request. We continue to have a member of the UCC designated, a conference person designated by the UCC Church, and that is the remaining connection and of their power. Although they founded us, that's the only remaining governance aspect, except if it should ever occur that Horizon House is dissolved and eliminated after all of the debts are paid, the UCC gets what's left over. So that's the history of a little bit about the church. And although founded by the UCC, Horizon House has always been open and welcoming to all faiths of persons and has never had a limited membership in that respect. Back to the board. The board nominees, that is, except for the UCC and the resident council member, the governance committee nominates these persons. They have to identify and cultivate and interview, evaluate potential members. They start by identifying any special skills or that the board might need what are the problems that they may be facing that would require some special skills that we should make certain new board members might possess and help us out with the particular problems. So then you have to look forward a little bit and hopefully find people who can help you with those special skills. They have to have a person who's dedicated to our mission and is willing to contribute to our success by their time and effort. Members are pure volunteers. There is no compensation to any board members whatsoever. The principal source of reference of the board members or potential board members is existing board members. The board, however, welcomes reference of capable and competent individuals from anyone, residents included. There are suggestions, and they maintain in the governance committee a list of potential members. The qualities that they seek are skills in particular areas where we need them, leadership experience, skills, and commitment. After the nomination committee, the governance committee nominates the
Ned,
board
could I
members.
interrupt just a second?
Sure.
A little more detail on the kind of qualifications. You say special skills they have, and that would include finance skills,
Finance skills, for
organization
instance,
skills, legal
organization
skills,
skills.
whatever else bears on the kind of business
Yeah.
that they have to do. And these people are highly credentialed. Yeah.
Highly, we
Yeah.
I can recall one year we were looking for new members. We were about to engage in renegotiation of the union contract. We thought maybe somebody who had some experience as a human resources officer might be a good person. But we do need financial skills, management skills, human relations, communication skills, public relations skills, those types of things.
Thank you.
We seek diversity. They seek diversity on the board, but never at the risk or at the sacrifice of quality and performance skills. The let me down here now. After the board elects, I better get to another. The term of office, 3 years, and the member can serve 3 terms. If a person is elected to serve out an unexpired term, they can still serve for a full three-year term. So you could have a member with 10 or 11 years of board experiences. A third of the membership of the Board of Trustees may be residents. We're guaranteed 1 resident on the board, and now with this board of 10 we can only have 2 additional, and we have. In my entire experience, there has always been the maximum number of residents on the Board of Trustees. Horizon House is almost unique, very, very unusual in the retirement community to have any residents who are full members of the Board of Trustees of the House. So let alone up to a third of the membership being able to be residents. Some retirement homes have a designee from the residents, but they don't give them a vote. They're a ex officio, non-voting member, token, if you will. But there's no question that ours are full participating members. They, other than the resident council president, however, they are not representatives of the residents. They are full board members with the agenda of the board, and they're selected not because they're residents, but they have the skills to be a board member. They happen to be residents, and that's a vital distinction to keep in mind, that they are not, quote, representatives. The president of the resident council is a representative. That doesn't mean they're not going to speak their opinion, and they're not going to listen to residents and express opinions of residents, but they are not formally a representative of the resident body. I think it's interesting that we have, as residents now, 4 former board presidents. We just lost one. We had 5. Susan Jones. We lost Nancy Edquist, who is a former president. Neil is a resident. Jim Fitzgerald and Ann Brand are all residents and are former presidents of the Board of Trustees. Ann Brand is the only resident to ever have served as president of the board while a resident at the same time. The first and only resident elected to serve as president of the board while a resident. The The functions of the board: establishes the policies to be adopted for the running the house, has to do the long-range planning, establish strategy for continued success, if you will, and has to not only hire the CEO, but has to evaluate the CEO and, if necessary, fire the CEO. But the CEO, who attends all the board meetings, is not a formal member of the board, but she is under the active direction of the Board of Trustees to hire, fire, and evaluate. Here's a organization chart, if you will, of the Board of Trustees. You can see how they have their organization. And the board current membership, here is our current Board of Trustees, and you'll note that Marcia Almquist and George Counts and Ronnie Budge are our resident members, and Gary Sutherton is the UCC representative. I should point out that Harold Zeitz, member of the board, gets to get an earful because his parents are residents of Horizon House too. So, so we get a once removed additional resident, if you will. The board works through committees. If you note there, the committees that are set up, and it has, these committees are through how it functions. Those committees meet in addition and separate from the board to carry out their specialized functions. The board committees have non-members on them. They can have, they're not just board members. They're controlled by the board members, but they don't, we can add expertise, and we can also provide a testing ground or a training ground, if you will, for new board members by inviting them to participate through the committees of the board. And we also have a number of residents who serve on these board committees but aren't members of the committees. And they're looking for one for the audit committee now, but you'll note the Community Relations and Diversity Committee has a number. The Finance Committee has Marcia, who is a board member, but Governance has Neil McReynolds, who is not a board member, and the Philanthropy Committee has Ann Brand and John and Elizabeth, as well as Ronnie. And so those are another opportunity, or let's say an example of how residents participate in the management of Horizon House, much different from other retirement communities. I would now like to turn it over to Bill, and you can talk about the resident council, because I think I've pretty well exhausted what I have to say about the Board of Trustees.
All right. The Residents' Council is made up, obviously, of residents, and they are elected by the whole population here. And it's a group that's 15 in number, and they have a 3-year non-renewable term. So once you've been a member of the council for 3 years, you're an alumnus or alumni, and then you can't run again. There are two functions that are really important, and this is something that I think all residents need to keep trying to remember. The first function is the obvious one. They handle activities, resident activities. They plan them, they organize them, they run them, they manage them, they fund them. That's all done by residents, and that is a principal function of the council. The second function is one that doesn't get talked about very much, but it's in the bylaws, it's in the charter, it's in the system, and that is that the council is a communication link between residents and the board, residents and the executive. And so they have communication function as well as an operating function there. The election of residents is done every year. There are 15 members, and they're 3-year terms, and you can figure out yourself. Even I can handle this kind of math. There are 5 new ones elected every year, and 3 years that gets to be 15. Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
And you may have seen in your mailbox today, and if you did, read it carefully, and if you didn't, go find one. But the election of council members is now starting again, and that starts with a memo to everybody that says, who do you want to vote for? Who do you want to nominate for council positions? And this is a very important responsibility of all residents, I think, is to think carefully about who among the people you know, people you work with, you think would be a good council member and have the qualities of effort and willingness to donate time and willingness to take stuff seriously, that would really be a good member of the council. You need to think about, and you can nominate yourself unless you've already had a term. You can nominate yourself or any of your neighbors or friends. And I think it's really important that you do that. Now, we have fluctuations over the years into how many people are nominated, and we don't want to get to the place where there are not enough nominees. So I want you to take this very seriously and think about who among the people you know would be good members of the council and could represent us and our needs and our preferences and our style in a way that you think is appropriate. And because these are non-renewable terms, a lot of the older folks, like you see up at the table here, you can't nominate us because we've already been there and done that. But that suggests to me that you might look at some of the newer people who haven't been here very long, a couple of years maybe, to get the lay of the land and figure out which elevators work or whatever the knowledge is you need. But you don't have to be a council member the first year you arrive. But after you've been here a couple of years, you should know enough about how the system operates, how the questions come up, what the values are, to be a good council member. So think very carefully around the people you know that you think, and fill out this form. And you can put your name on it if you like, if you're an eligible nominee. But this is in your mailbox today, and I really would wish you to take it seriously. And if you don't find it in your mailbox, why come and talk to some of us, and we'll get you some copies. Sometime in July, I think, these have to be returned with names on them of people you would like to nominate. Then there's a committee. There's a committee at Horizon House for everything. There's nothing in the bylaws about that, but there might as well be, because everything here is done by committee. And there's a nominating committee that's been selected by the council, and they will take all these recommendations that you send in, and they will interview. Everybody gets interviewed. And then they will look to see what vacancies will be on the council next year and what particular skills will be uncovered when those people's terms are finished. And they look at the list of nominees and have them all evaluated and assessed and try and decide which of the nominees would fit the needs that they have for the next term. And so that is a very careful process, and I've been through it a couple times myself, and I know these people have. And it is a very serious business that this nominating committee gets involved in. And so that happens in July. And then there will be a slate of 5 nominees proposed by the nominating committee that will be notified to everybody in the place. And then there will be a meeting in October, or I think it's in the fall sometime, where it'll be a regular council meeting and you can vote as to whether or not you want these people on the council. And at that time, the bylaws make it clear that if your nominee did not get selected on the slate by the nominating committee, the nominations from the floor are perfectly welcome, and now and then that happens. So it's a very open process, but it really begins with you taking very seriously your responsibility to check around the people you know and see who might be good to put into this nominating process. Okay, let's see what happens next here when I push this button. I never know what happens when I push a button. This is the structure of the council. It is, as I say, there are 15 members. They select a president, a secretary, a vice president, a treasurer, and a vice president for administration and a vice president for programs. Then you see these little gray boxes. Those are council members that each has a cluster of relevant committees. And you can't probably figure out what all these shorthand things are, but these, there's stuff for social events and stuff, and games and art and so on. And we'll talk a little bit about the committee structure, but these members of the council will have a collection of committees under their supervision. That's the wrong word. They're not really supervisors of the committee. They are facilitators for the committee. And their job is to find out what the committee wants to do and see if they can eliminate any obstacles that might be in the way. And so that's what council members do. So you thinking about somebody as a council nominee, think about somebody who might like to engage in that kind of activity, looking at a committee, they want to do this, they want to do that, they don't have enough money, they can't do this because of that reason, and you sort of help them get done what it is they want to do as a committee. Now the bar at the bottom of this chart is the committee list itself. There are 60 or 70 committees, and this is an astonishing number to people in this industry. And those of us who've been at, and I'm sure both Neil and Ned have, to these national meetings now and then where they have, thousands of folks, and they show up from CCRCs, what they call this group, from all around the country. And you don't learn very much at the speeches, but in the hallways and in the stairwells and in the elevators, you'll learn a lot talking to people from Omaha and Charleston and whatever. And whenever somebody says, do you have residents involved in the management of your place? Oh, yes, we do. We have a resident who is allowed to come and listen. We don't let them talk at the board meetings, but they come and listen. And then say, oh no, we have 3 members who come and they can talk. And sometimes they actually have a resident on the board that actually gets to vote. And when I say, well, we have 3 residents on the board, they're full voting members, blah, 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 and people are astonished at that. And they say, well, how do you manage all the activities? And I say, well, we have committees. How many committees? We have 60 to 70 committees. Anyway, what happens is you see here, this is the current list of committees. And if you look down this list, you'll see they're grouped into sort of relevant categories. But there they all are, and it's an amazing array of richness. And it really involves the day-to-day management of affairs that affect you every time. So, and this is another thing, along with being responsible for getting nominees into the nominee pool, another thing we're all responsible for is to be active in committees that interest us. And incidentally, if you don't find a committee that's of particular interest to you, you can do what Sam Sperry did this year. He said, well, we need a committee on public affairs. We don't have one. We should have one. So what do? We promote the idea. We submit it to the council. We ask for money. We ask for operating authority, and the council grants us that. Now there's a new committee. I'm not even sure it's on this list. It's happened since.
It's there.
Oh, is it here?
Yeah.
Oh, that's good.
Wherever
It's under discussion groups or something. Or anyway, the point is, if there is an activity you think you and other friends and neighbors would like to engage in, and there is no committee, that's not at all an obstacle. You just have to get together, decide what you want to do, make a proposal to the council, and the chances are pretty good that it'll happen. But this is where the life of the activities that go on at Horizon House is done through this committee structure, and it really requires us to be active with these committees, including being chair of committees, and that's something that is really, really important here, and we need lots of that. Now, I'm just going to show you a little graphic now, which shows you. Excuse me.
I've got one point to make.
Okay.
Compared to other RCCs, Horizon House doesn't have an activities director on its staff.
That's true.
We're very unusual. And the reason is they don't have any activities to direct. We do it.
We do.
The residents do all the activities.
Yeah, let's look at that. This is the chart that you're going to see now, which will work up in various pieces, that describes how these two quite different governing bodies, the board and the council, how they actually work together. And they do work together. Those of us who've been around a while and have participated in various levels in this stuff I think are impressed, I certainly am, with how well they work. There now and then there are conflicts, there are disagreements, there are arguments, there are different preferences and different views of different groups, but by and large it works very well, and I think that's a sign, and it's been working very well for a long time. Let's just look at it in pieces. The first thing that has to happen in a group organization like this with two governing bodies is that policy decisions have to be made. Now, I'm not talking about nuts and bolts, what was served for dinner last night and which elevator works, which one doesn't, but policy decisions. And do we build a West Tower? Do we do this? Do we do that? Do we raise the salaries of the staff? Do we hire more people in this activity or that? Those are policy decisions that involve a variety of issues, and the kinds of issues are listed here. One of them obviously is what policies are needed to take care of current residents, and that's something that you and I all think about being in that category ourselves, but that's something that the board has to make policies about. And when they make a policy like we should have a West Tower, they're thinking about how is that going to impact existing residents, and it will, and we're going to start seeing that pretty quickly as the construction starts. But that's not the only policy. They also have to think about future residents, and you and I don't think much about future residents, but if you think about what the board has to decide in planning for the future, somebody told me once at one point in one of these organizations, they discovered that they'd built a new building and the baby boomers would not sleep in double beds. They had to have king-size beds, and the rooms that were designed in this building were not big enough for king-size beds without very difficult problems. So styles change, interest changes, future residents are different people. They're going to have different preferences, different thoughts, different ideas about what is nice, what is effective, what is attractive. And the board has to kind of sort through some of that stuff, not just with current residents, but thinking about future residents. Another element is staff. We always have to think about staff, the number of staff, the way they're trained, the way they're selected, the way they're paid. All those are policy questions that have to be settled at a general level, at the board level, and that turns out to be very important. The little box here talks about goals and values. If you look through the bylaws and the charters and the various official documents that hold this enterprise together, you'll see missions and attitudes and goals and values about neighborhood, being a good neighbor and being honest and being fair and other kinds of things of that sort. Those are all things that get involved in decisions of various kinds, and that's one of the policies of the board, to be sure those values that are laid out in our charter documents are followed and are grown. And then, of course, the last one, which is maybe the thing you might have first thought about, apart from all the other stuff, if what the board has to decide is going to run us into bankruptcy, that's not a good policy. So the board has to deal with that, and that turns out to be a very complicated business. We're a big business, there are millions of dollars involved, and lots of time involved, different kinds of financing arrangements, different kind of draws on the finance, and the board has to sort through all the uncertainties, the economy, the inflation rates, all the rest of that stuff. And that's a complicated job. I did sit on the finance committee for 3 years, and I can tell you that we meet quarterly, and every quarter, it's never failed, there's at least 70 pages of charts and documents and columns of numbers and numbers and numbers and on that we had to sort through to arrange these, to assess these matters of fiscal soundness. So it's a very important part of the job, and that's one of the reasons why in selecting board members, as Ned says, finance experience and experience in working with things of this kind is one of the skills of the many that a board member has to have. So those are the kinds of policies. There are many others. You could list lots of them. But I just wanted you to see something about the spectrum of policies. Now what happens is the board is in charge of these policies, and we're not. We don't make the policies, the board does. That is, the Residents' Council doesn't. And so it is an important thing to select good board members, and it's an important thing to have the board itself managed that sort of. Now, one of the things the board does is hire a CEO, and that is an important thing, and as Ned said, we interview lots of people. We've all some of us have been on selection committees, and we've interviewed various kinds of people for various kinds of CEO situations, and that's a very difficult job, but it is a very important job. It's one of the most important things the board can do. And once the CEO is selected and the staff which follows, then what happens is the facilities are in good hands. We have elevators that operate, and we have food, we have plumbing, we have air conditioning, we have all the other facilities, decorating and redecorating and so on. All those things are handled through the staff and the executive branch. And so that's what they do, is provide the facilities in which we live. Now, if you look at this chart now, it might be the kind of chart you'd see if you and I had bought a lifetime membership at a suite in the Olympic Hotel. The hotel would take care of the vacuuming of the carpets and the repair of the plumbing and the repainting and all that stuff, and they would provide food for us. But that's it. We'd be tenants. And one thing you must get deep into your mind here, you are not just a tenant at Horizon House. And the reason is, the council, instead of just being tenants, we have, first of all, the control and management of all the activities. We elect our own residence council, and all those committees we talked about produce all the talks, the movies, the concerts, the lectures, all that thing that happens. The Olympic Hotel would not provide you that. And some CCRCs would, but they would hire an activities director, and they would decide what was going to happen on Thursday night. Was it going to be bingo or something else? We're in another league, totally different league, because we have stuff going on all the time, and it is the result of the activities of these committees, which operate under the authority of the council, which we elect. So we decide exactly what goes on in the way of activities. And that's one of the unusual characteristics of this place. But we of course have to make it work. We have to run for council office. We have to participate in committee work. We have to take our share of committee chairmanships when our time comes. So if we do that, and we do that, I think, very well, we have all the committees and all the activities that we want, and they are provided to us. Now, this chart, just to mention a couple of things, and I'll be finished now, that Neil talked about. I'd like you to see it on the screen. You might think from looking at the chart this way that the residents have very little role in policy questions, because that's done by the board. But what we've talked about here is that there are always residents on the board. And so they are free-thinking folks who can say, no, I don't think you should do this, I don't think you should do that. I've talked to my residents, and my sense is, they'd rather do this or rather do that. Those people are always there, and a number of them are also residents, are also on the board committees. So there should never be any serious surprise if the system works well about decisions coming from the board. Now, a lot of people were surprised at the West Tower when it was first announced a couple of years ago, and that might have been handled better by all of us, I suppose. But the point is, as long as the residents are on the board, and as long as the residents participate in board committees, then, and as long as there are people willing to take those jobs, there should be very little in the way of surprise about new stuff that happens. And you may disagree, that's fine. But the policy decisions are made by the board, not the residents. But we are not tenants. We have a proprietary interest in this place because of the way it's operated and the way it's structured here. And that means that whatever happens in the board level are never going to be very far from what residents understand about. Now, there's the final arrow I'd put on this chart is this one. It is part of the culture here, part of the secret sauce, part of the flavor of what goes on here, and that is that the executive offices have open door policies. You can call up Erica, or you can send her an email, or you can walk into her office and express your thoughts about something. And if you are a resident who has a concern and it's within her jurisdiction, I think she'd welcome that. I know she'd welcome that. So that's another responsibility we have, to sort of be sure that we let people know if there are things we don't like or things we think should be handled differently. And you can walk into the executive's office and talk to her, and that's been true of the 2 or 3 executive officials that I've seen in my tenure here. So it's because it's not a function of the CEO's willingness to talk. It's a function of the culture of Horizon House. They know that when they take the job here, that they're going to people. I sent a note to one of our CEOs once, and I said, I just saw in the newspaper an article that one of the city agencies, I can't remember which it was, the transit agency or something, was spending $950 an hour for management coaching. And I said to her, just want you to know that a lot of us are willing to do that, provide that service at no charge. But it is the case that door is open, and you can really walk in and talk to people about stuff, and set up committees if you need one, whatever it takes. It's a very open process, but you have to run it. That's all I have to say, Neil. Now, do we have any, I guess, questions?
That was us next. Well, thank you very much, Bill, Ned. Good job, excellent way to take us out here. Now it's your turn. We've covered a lot of subjects over this, describing how this place operates. So now it's your chance to ask the questions you'd like. Got a couple of mic runners here, so let's raise your hand. We'll identify you. And down here, down at that end,
There's one
Sam.
right here.
There we go.
There's one right over there.
Okay.
We have somebody here in the front?
Yes.
Oh, wait, your mic's.
So
Oh.
the question I have, could you put that last slide back up?
If I can make this thing go backwards.
Yes, you did.
Amazing.
When I came here a little less than a year ago, when Emmett and Shan moved here from California, we loved the apartment, and then we had a wine hour and a pride parade, and we said, these are our people. We never expected.
We can't quite hear you. Could you keep that microphone very
Sure.
close?
And so we did all the financials just in case. I don't know if anybody else does it that way. We lived on Lopez, a great community. And I'm not clear, other than what I heard that day, that it's a resident-directed community.
Mm-hmm.
What are the goals and values?
Well, that's a great question, and it has a lot of answers, but I think the basic notion is that the direction and the activities and the characteristics of the community here are the result of resident preferences, and that's the general answer. Now there may be more specifics, but do you have a thought?
I think our goal is to have a community where people can thrive and participate to the fullest extent they desire, and we can help each other have a wonderful life. I think that's the goal and the value of this community.
Mm-hmm.
There's a wonderful slogan downstairs on the B1 level from Paul Parman, who says, "We may have retired, but we haven't retired from life."
Yeah.
That's right.
Okay. Another question. Yeah. Bill, there you go.
More of a comment. There were a number of comments made at the table about the uniqueness of our not having activities directors. But I would like to highlight the fact that is primarily focused on independent living. There certainly is heavy staff involvement in assisted living on activity there. Which I presume is extremely useful to folks who live in assisted living.
That's a very good point. I
point.
appreciate you bringing it up, because they do work very hard down there to provide all kinds of services. And you may know, and some of you are deeply involved in this, there are a number of residents who are participant in that process as book readers or singers or other kinds of people helping with games and other sorts of things, and escorts to bring people down to concerts and stuff. So that's a very good point. There's a lot of direction up there, or down there in the assisted living world. Yeah, indeed.
Another question?
Yeah,
Yes.
so I've been on a few boards, some of which were very effective and some of which were less so. And one of the questions that came to me when you were describing the board processes, when you were looking for a new CEO, what process was used to identify candidates? Did you work with somebody to develop the job description? Did you have somebody come in and help you
Can I
know where you could
answer that?
look?
I can give you my experience and being on a couple of selection committees. First of all, in this world, you don't start from ground zero. You hire a consultant. So the first thing you do is find somebody who has found chief executives for other similar kinds of enterprises. And then you send them what you think they need to know to do a first cut. They then will come up with a list, and you will go look at that and limit it. And pretty soon you get down to a place where there are 3 or 4 that look pretty good. Then you bring them here and subject them to interviews with other board members, interviews with staff, and many, many interviews with residents. And then you gather all that information together, and the board decides on the basis of those evaluations which of the candidates should be offered the job. So it's quite a cumbersome and complicated business, but it's quite thorough, I think. It's my experience. You have a different thought?
No. Exactly. It's a very thorough process with heavy resident involvement in the
Very,
final selection
yeah.
process.
That's a good point, but you described it well, Bill, and that point's a good one
Yeah.
about resident involvement. Okay, another one?
Got a question over here? Roger?
Yes,
Oh, yeah,
hang on.
sure.
A couple of things that were mentioned, just perk my ears, and I'm just curious about them. One is, what was the origin of the information that you were presented when you look at this booklet or book of fiscal soundness, and you were spending time going through that? Do we have a firm that helps you do that, or writes the points of it, or do you create that information and discuss it?
I'll give you my answer to that. First of all, we have staff. Christy Seymour is one of the superior fiscal analysts in this industry,
Okay.
and just been awarded some award for being the best CFO in the Northwest or something. She is important. She has a staff. They generate charts and graphs and documents and columns and numbers. Then there are other consultants that are hired depending on what the project is. There's some people who were hired as consultants for dealing with several components of the new towers finance, and banks and other kinds of investment advisors. So there's quite a range of skills that are involved, and I think in my small view of it, it seems to me that it's quite thorough. And yeah, and it's not done just by off the back of an envelope. I mean, this is very serious stuff.
I'm sure you're right.
Yeah.
And then the board selects some of those consultants?
The board selects all the consultants, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sense. And then shifting gears maybe completely, I'm just a little bit curious about, you bring people on the board with certain expertise. Can you explain the process of generating the concept of the West Tower, and were there people on the board that could assist both in developing the concept into reality, as well as when it got further down the line, could talk about the proper consultants and find those? And was that done by the board or members that you had put onto the
We'll
board?
talk about that.
Go ahead.
Well, you were on the board.
Finance committee.
I'm just on the finance committee, and I don't know
That-
what the board
Oh.
did, but I assume
I
they did
wasn't
the same
present at
thing the
board,
finance
but-
committee did.
but the board would definitely consider all of the issues, and particularly they were involved in the study of the necessity for our future financial well-being and existence, even our subsistent existence, of having to have an expanded facility and a newer, new facility. That was no question of the board. They had some consultants, and of course, once they made the decision to proceed, you have to bring in your financial consultants for your financing, and as well as your construction and,
Sure.
and so forth. Yeah, and all of that has been done.
And those have been board members that
Well,
were
the board
pertinent
members
to
have
that
done
process.
it, yes, and,
Sure.
and hired.
And just, I don't know this, but it would be interesting to find out, when did this concept gel? When did the West Tower spark ignite? And then also, when was the choice made to go ahead?
I don't
Can
know
you
the-
share that?
I don't know the dates, maybe you do, but I do know this, that, and you'll find this in the library in the board minutes, there was a strategic planning committee that worked on the question of what's going to happen in the future to this place,
Yeah.
looking at different levels of demand, different competition situations, whatever. And they came up with a conclusion that there were 2 or 3 options. One of them was to become part of a larger organization, that is to say, be bought by Skyline, or be bought by Mirabella, or be bought by some other national organization that has hundreds of these around the country. That was one option. Another option was, they had several of them. I haven't looked at that report for a while, but if you look at it, it's in the library. They concluded that probably the best thing for us was to expand our situation. The underlying issue seemed to be that at the scale we operate in, we can't be as efficient as if we were a little larger. And that's a common problem in business. And to get larger, we can either join another organization and become a component of Mirabella, or we can enlarge our own place. And so that's kind of the strategic plan, came up with that option as probably the best. And all this was a result of consultations. I haven't seen the list of consultants, but there was a serious deep dive into those questions at that time. Now when they finally decided to do the West Tower, that I don't know the date, but it
3
is
years, 4 years
4 or
ago.
5 years ago, anyway.
3 or 4, yeah.
3 or 4 years ago, yeah. And I will tell you that I had concerns about the way that was shared with the residents, because although there were residents in all these committees, the decision to build the West Tower came as a surprise to a lot of residents, maybe a shock to some. And that to me is a failure of communication. I think that's something that could have been better handled, but I do know the process was very thorough and very systematic all the way up to that point. I wish they'd have been a little more fully informing the residents.
Well, thank you very much.
Yes. Oh, you got one?
Yes, well, thank you for this. This is very informative. I have a sort of a detailed question, and that is, I gather from what was said tonight that there is a maximum number of, maximum board members, 15.
15.
And we're currently at 10. I was wondering if you could give us some insight into the disparity and whether this is a permanent decision or whether we're just at a holding point waiting to get more members.
I think the member of the governance committee of the board should answer that question.
We're in the process of starting that process of filling out those remaining spots. So in the next few months, yes.
There's one out there. Over to your right.
I was just going to mention in reference to the issue that was just brought up about the West Tower and how the process came about. Previously, in my professional life, I worked at a global financial company and had the opportunity to be involved in some of their strategic planning. And when I knew I was coming to Horizon House and heard about this West Tower, there was documents made public to residents if they wanted to look at, which I assume is still open to you if you want to take a look, because I went through them and I was very impressed with the rigorous process that the board went through. in making in their decision making. It aligned with what my experience of a top financial company was.
Good, thank you, thank you.
Doesn't look like we have any more.
Yeah, I was that clergy representative from the United Church of Christ for a year, and the primary result of that is Lenny and I are here. It didn't take much to realize this really is a resident-driven place, and I had been associated somewhat or other with other so-called old folks' homes. And this was far different. We're glad we're here.
Good comment, thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to follow up on something that wouldn't have occurred to me except for earlier questions. This is a great chart, but an awful lot is hidden behind it. Goals and values doesn't tell us a lot. And I was thinking, if a decision was being made earlier on about whether we would build a West Tower or become a wholly owned subsidiary of Mirabella, for example, that's consequential enough that it seems like it's something that shouldn't be allowed to happen in a council without full consideration for all the residents at the time the decision is yet to be made. I mean, it was a big decision for us to come here rather than Mirabella. And I would think if the decision had gone the other direction, that would have been a violation of my understanding when I moved in. Similarly, I think, by the way, something like that happened to us is when they eliminated the nurse's station. I thought that was part of the deal when we moved in. There would be somebody here a lot of time, not just on the second or third floors, but available to the rest of us. A couple things have happened to me in health that would have made a huge difference to have somebody here whom I could consult with. So I'm a little, I don't know how to express this, but when we talk about resident-driven, it seems to me there are lots of decisions that matter to the way this place feels to residents who are quote-unquote fully included, that should be discussed fully with the residents on the way to decision-making and not after the decision's been made.
I have to agree with you, Andy. I think those are the kind of decisions that ought to be somehow, and I say somehow because it's not easy. Some of those things are, the nurse's question is easy, I thought, and I agree with you, but the West Tower is a different magnitude, and I think, I wasn't there at the time, but my guess is that the people at the board who were sorting this out and considering the strategic plan and the consultants that they talked to realized that too much publicity is not ideal for that kind of a thing. And maybe they just wanted to sort of not be quite clear as to what they were thinking until they fairly well had it in order. I don't know. I'm making that up, but I assume that's something like that was involved. The nurses question, I was in the finance committee when I heard that they were closing the nurses' office here. And I said, good grief, how could you do that? When we came here, the idea of having a nurse in the building was a great idea. And I got the accountant's answer. We've looked at the usage of that office over the last year, and it goes down and down and down. It is now below the place where we can justify the expense. And I said, well, you can't do everything by numbers. You know how accountants are. Us lawyers don't like accountants for that reason. But there was a very clear picture to them that there simply was not a way to fund that office, given the utility that was measurable, and that happens. And I'm sorry it did, but it did. And maybe we'll get a committee on bring back the nurse, and maybe we can do that again. I don't know, but it's they're very, very good questions. That's all I can say to Andy's question. Do you have a better answer to that?
No, but I do want to emphasize one matter. The fact that we're resident-driven doesn't mean the residents are going to make every decision around here. Thank God, maybe. But maybe we're the most expertise there is, but certain decisions have to be made by the board. They will listen to residents. They're always willing to listen, but they have to make the decision, and we may disagree. I'm sure we disagree every year when they raise the rates, but it has to be done. And that's, the residents aren't going to make all the decisions.
I think that's very clear. The legal authority to make decisions like that is not in the residents. The legal authority is in the board. But the way this place is structured, as you can see from this chart, before the board can do anything, they have to give us a fair opportunity to know what's going on, to understand the reasons why, to consider the other side, and to have an opportunity to express ourselves in a comfortable environment. And I think that's basically what we have mostly. There'll be shortfalls now and then, I'm sure, but that's the idea. They have the board has the legal authority, but we have to be consulted and talked to and informed about that before they decide. And I think that's kind of the way I would describe this particular chart. That's what it looks like to me. A complicated and I think rather sophisticated governance model, but I think one that has generally worked pretty well, except for Andy and I worried about the nurse. Maybe we ought to start a campaign of some kind.
I want to put in a pitch for the West Tower. Some years ago, I was the physician representative to the board at Group Health Association, DC, and also the executive staff had made a decision that we weren't going to survive unless we expanded. We need to build a hospital or at least a medical facility that was the equivalent, and the board turned it down. They did not expand, and Group Health failed and had to be bought out by Kaiser eventually. So I want to put in a pitch for the West Tower as exactly the right thing to do.
Yeah, I don't think anyone disagrees.
One more?
So one of the things that I liked about coming the first time I was here was the diversity. Now, if I look at you three, I see white men. And I see diversity in the staff. But is there something we do about diversity in the residents?
That's a really good question and a very tough one.
It's one that they work on very, very hard, and Erica is particularly devoted and working hard among communities to seek more residents and more diversity of residents. We are probably the most diverse economically of any of the retirement homes. Now, we have some other elements of diversity we haven't lived up to and fulfilled as well, yet we would like to. It's certainly one of the goals.
But there is a board committee named the Diversity Committee, and they do work hard. It is, if you stop to think about it, it's very difficult because there are many groups that we would like to have better represented here that don't retire the way we do. Their family structures are different, their situations are different, and so this is not a model that a lot of them find attractive. So it's a complicated question, but we do have people working on it, even though the word diversity has become a bad word, I guess, these days at national levels, but it's still a good word here.
Yes, first of all, thank you for this. This has been an extremely murky area from my understanding, and this was very welcome. I see on the chart how the board has an arrow to the executive staff for choosing the staff, and I see where the current residents can give input to the board. How do residents learn about what's going on in the board? What is the communication from the board, either to the residents' council or to the residents? How does that information get transmitted about what is going on?
Good. Several ways. First, the CEO reports. Secondly, the Board of Trustees now is committed to having at least annual sessions in small groups with residents. They just did that in May, was it? I think they did. And that was the first ever that had been done. They also annually have a full board presence at a meeting of all all residents are invited to communicate board actions, and then the small groups. So, but I suspect the frequent communication, the board quarterly, would be through the CEO and her reports to us. Or
Those
our
are-
resident council president, to the extent that as a member of the board, she's free and able to communicate. Some things they do have to wait a while and can't be immediately reported.
I have a suggestion for 3 years from now when you do this again, that it would be helpful every time we take a look at major ways in which things are organized, to start with the goals and values. And I know we have a list of specific goals and values that was thoughtfully put together. And you recently, this past year, added the word sustainability, which I appreciate. But it would be helpful for us to be able to judge all the rest of this and have our thoughts perhaps match those goals or raise questions if any of these values are no longer as important as they once were. That's
Thank
a
you for that
suggestion.
suggestion. We'll get that into the list.
Neil, I don't know how much time you have left, but there's something on this chart over here that I thought was worthy of calling to attention. And that's when Bill was talking about the relationships between the residents, the activities, the facilities, and the staff. And somebody who really makes this place go, including the very meeting we're having tonight, is Reza Ransom. And she is a real gem in this community. Let's give her a hand.
Constantly.
I just wanted to say that my understanding is that the minutes of 501c3 board meetings are public, are available to the public.
That is not true.
No, not in
Not,
Washington.
there's not a legal requirement that they
Not
be
in
true.
Washington State.
No.
So are the minutes made available?
I think our board meetings, minutes are
I thought they were in the library.
in the
That's what I
library.
thought,
I
yeah.
think they
So
are in the
I
library.
think there's a book
It's not
in
a
the-
legal requirement.
No, but
And-
in some states it is, you know, at least some version. But at least the minutes are in the library. So
Yeah.
if you want to know what the board did, go to the library, find the book, look.
I think that's good point.
Yeah.
Good point. Nothing else?
Thank
Well,
you.
thank you very much for your questions today, and thank you our presenters tonight.
Don't slide back.
Ned,
Be
Bill,
careful.
thank you very much, and thanks for coming.